Oh. Oh, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jim and Club Cumming for inviting me tonight. I'm honored to be reading tonight with such brilliant writers like Ricky, Traber, Craig, and Emmanuel. So my selection is an excerpt from a first-person essay in progress. The working title is The Lonesome Whistle. Before I could see the train, I could hear it coming around the bend. The engineer sounded his horn, a bellow shrill and forlorn. My mother's husband sat across from me on the picnic deck in the backyard of his house, the railroad tracks less than a dozen yards behind him. Russell Lee, muscular from years of construction work, jackhammered the ground with his right leg. Struggling not to let me see his tears, he spat a wad of snuff into an old Planter's peanut can he used as a spittoon. "Your mom has AIDS," he said. I stared at the man in front of me, his long sideburns, now mostly gray, contrasting against his copper skin. Near the redwood table where we were seated, a hummingbird feeder buzzed with activity. The whirring collided with the clacking of a passing train, and the cacophony, the severity of the moment, made me want to gouge my eyes out. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Russ, his gaze downturned, defeated, but not angry, looked up. "I have proof." I'd met Russell Lee even before my mother did. At 5, I'd gone to Corpus Christi with my uncle to pay a visit to an ailing relative. Into the dreary hospital room walked a tall, brawny guy carrying a motorcycle helmet and wearing purple corduroy pants, his thinning hair wind-blown from the long ride from Austin. "Is that a hippie?" I wondered. I'd heard of them on TV, but I'd never met one in person. 2 years later, my father, a suit and tie wearing high school principal, descended into an alcohol and methamphetamine-induced psychosis. My mother, Nelda, a petite blonde schoolteacher, fled the family home when the death threats by her husband became blows to the face and a brandished .38. 6 months after we left, Nelda divorced my father. The court proceedings forbade him for any future contact. We never saw him again. One night, 3 months later, my mom insisted I put on nice clothes and brush my hair. "Mr. Stroud's gonna come over," she said. My mom had been set up on a blind date with a man in the purple pants, Russell Lee, who was the uncle of her brother-in-law. Immediately they were crazy for each other. She moved by his sense of humor and protective nature. He by her kindness and quick laughter. Nelda loved that Russ had overcome so many obstacles in life. One quarter Cherokee, he was born into a sharecropping family in the Arkansas Ozarks during the Depression. The last of 12 children, his mother died when he was 7. Times were tough, but so was Russell's father, a heavy drinker. By age 14, Russ dropped out of middle school and was living on his own. He married young, had 2 kids, and by 45, he'd been divorced for almost a decade. On their first date, Russell Lee asked my mom to marry him. Within a month, they held a quick ceremony, and we moved from a staid middle-class life in San Antonio to a duplex apartment covered with day-glow psychedelic posters in working-class South Austin. "Russ is your real father now. Call him Dad, please," Nelda asked the first night we moved in with him. A first grader, I did as I was told, though I felt like a liar. I'd only met the man 4 times. Russell's upbringing had made him an avid outdoorsman. I loved books and music. If given a choice, I'd have never gone outside at all. Thin and blonde and asthmatic, I embodied my new stepfather's physical opposite, an albino salamander next to a grizzly bear. He made a true effort to get close, taking me fishing on Town Lake. I threw the pole into the water. He never asked again. Russell Lee thought every boy should know how to shoot a rifle and took me to the grasslands along the railroad track. After I fired a single shot under his supervision, he maintained that I should never be allowed to touch firearms again. "That boy's dangerous," he said to my mother. "The only ones that'll be safe are the deer." I longed to stay home, play Scrabble, and make the occasional baked Alaska. My mother, too, wanted me to be more like normal boys. They set to remold me in a more pleasing image. Cub Scouts was first. I kept offering to make cupcakes for the troop. My parents redoubled their efforts. Next, I was given an enforced outdoor schedule, certain hours wherein I would be required to play in the open air, shirtless, in the summer months. Quiet activities like reading were discouraged with a 1 chapter per day limit for all books, even if they were 3 pages, like in the Wizard of Oz series, which was my favorite. As I grew, the relationship with my stepdad became more contentious. He became irate when I was elected student council president my junior year of high school, objecting because extracurriculars would interfere with my part-time janitor job at JCPenney. "I demand you quit," he shouted. I tried explaining that the position might help me get scholarships for college. I knew my parents wouldn't have any money to help me. "How about a compromise?" I said. "I promise I won't run for student council again next year." Russell Lee agreed. Secretly, though, I remained defiant. My plan was to enter the election for senior class president, a different position. I did win the office, and my mother knew of my predicament. She never mentioned the election at home. But in the early fall of my senior year, we were invited as a family to a relative's house for dinner. "The ladies at church tell me you were elected senior class president. Congratulations," said our hostess. My stepdad heard. He made a fist and smacked it against his upper thigh. "You promised me," he said, his body shaking at my insubordination. Our family stayed for dinner, but I lost my appetite. Russell Lee didn't look at me the entire meal. Once in the car home, he yelled for me to step down from the office. "I can't quit," I said. "You live under my house, my roof, then you will live by my rules." "No." "Then leave my house." "Please, Russ," my mother begged. "Let it go." He loved her so much that he couldn't deny her anything, and I was allowed to stay. Thereafter, my stepdad and I avoided each other. Throughout my senior year, I stayed away from their home as much as possible, using it primarily as a crash pad or maybe a place to shower. Every semester of high school, my stepfather had told me that I needed to take an auto repair class. When I learned to drive, he gave me a 1956 Pontiac he rebuilt, which had once belonged to my maternal grandfather. "Every man should know how to work his own car," he said. "It'll save you a lot of money." Well, for 3.5 years I had stalled, promising to take the class later. Before the last semester of high school, Russell Lee brought up the mechanics class once again. "I'm not dropping calculus, physics, and AP English to become some grease monkey," I said. "Don't disrespect me. I'm not meant for manual labor like you. I have a mind and I know how to use it." "Stay till then," my mother pleaded. Again, Russell Lee acquiesced, but he skipped my high school graduation, where I was honored for outstanding achievement by marching first among my peers into the hall and onto the stage. His absence was fine by me. I told myself I didn't want him there. I moved out as soon as I could to be near my classes at the University of Texas. My stepdad and I saw each other infrequently, mainly at family events where we shook hands and then we kept our distance. By my junior year in college, my parents had been quarreling and eventually separated. My mom moved into a motel room, then rented an apartment. Russell Lee stayed in their home in the neighborhood, located next to the railroad tracks. My mother taught Sunday school at a Southern Baptist church where I was the pianist. And one Sunday spring afternoon after service, my mom told me that Russ was having a tough time over their breakup. She asked me to pay him a visit as a favor to her. So after Russ had told me that my mother had AIDS, I remained silent a long time. "What are you talking about?" I finally asked. "Your mom is having sex with the engineers." He was fighting back tears. "Who's the guy?" I asked. "Not a guy. All of them. Every time the horn blows, it's a signal." He believed my mother was meeting for sexual rendezvous in an old shack across the tracks. There's a bend in the tracks here," I said. "The trains have to warn anyone who might be on the other side of the curve. It's the law." He didn't believe me, insisting the evidence my mother had full-blown AIDS was in the abandoned house across the way. Someone had spray-painted "Nelda has AIDS" proof on the wall, but the statement clearly had Russell Lee's handwriting. He had a special way of writing the letter I, which looked like a tadpole trying to swallow its own tail. When I called my mom in tears, she said, he
He's accused me of a grotesque sexual infidelity. I couldn't take it anymore.
Many of his own relatives, it turned out, she added, had taken her side, saying that this had happened with his first wife. My stepdad was shunned by people who loved and trusted him. Because of the emotional distance between us, I didn't feel let down or personally hurt by what was clearly a case of mental illness. He had been diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic when I was in my early teens, but my mom had hidden the true depth of his illness their entire marriage, until now. Knowing the extent of his disease made it easier for me to be kind. I started visiting him regularly to keep him company. A few months later, he started back on his medication, my parents reconciled, and they moved back in together. I'd always feared rejection by my family for being gay, so when at 30 I finally came out, I was treated with great love.
You know, it doesn't make any difference to me, my dad said. Your father's been telling me you were different since you were 16, my mom said. When I asked how, she reminded me that when a boy called me from Nebraska one summer when I was 16, I promptly fainted. My mom said, I would have had a harder time if it wasn't for Russ. I was shocked. Instead of my adversary, Russell Lee had been my secret ally all along. Into my 30s, I started a tradition for Father's Day. If I could choose anyone in the world as my dad, I'd choose you, I'd say. When I was 45, he fell and broke a hip. There were complications from his diabetes that necessitated him being put into a medically induced coma. I flew to San Antonio from New York City, where I'd been living for nearly 15 years, so I could be with my mom by his side. The doctors told us he had little chance for recovery, and we made the decision to turn off the respirator. On the morning of his funeral, I awoke, bleary-eyed, having written his eulogy into the early morning hours. A hummingbird flew up and hovered near my face, reminding me of the day on the picnic table in the backyard. I no longer felt like a hypocrite every time I called him Dad. He was. I missed the man in the purple pants.
Wow.